The blood was still wet on Marcus Rivera's knuckles when the elevator doors opened behind him. He froze, mop halfway to the marble floor, every muscle in his body coiled like a loaded weapon. For 3 terrifying seconds, he wasn't a janitor in a gray uniform cleaning the 42nd floor of Meridian Financial Tower at midnight. He was back in Fallujah, hearing footsteps that meant death, feeling the weight of his team's lives pressing down on his shoulders. The scar along his left temple throbbed with phantom pain as Victoria Castellanos stepped out of the executive elevator, her Louboutin heels clicking against the polished floor like bullets hitting concrete. She shouldn't be here. No one should be here. This was supposed to be his sanctuary. The quiet hours, when he could disappear into the mindless routine of cleaning, when the ghosts of his past finally stopped whispering. But now she was watching him with those sharp, calculating eyes that missed nothing, and Marcus knew with the cold certainty of someone who'd survived too many ambushes that his carefully constructed new life was about to explode. The blood on his knuckles wasn't his own. 10 minutes earlier, Marcus had been cleaning the men's restroom on the 38th floor when he'd heard the muffled crying. Sophia's voice echoed in his memory, his 12-year-old daughter telling him about the bullies at school, the ones who called her the janitor's kid when they thought she couldn't hear. The sound had triggered something primal in Marcus, something he'd spent 3 years learning to suppress. He'd found the source quickly. A security guard cornering one of the young night shift cleaners, Miguel Santos, barely 19 and supporting his sick mother. The guard's hands were where they shouldn't be, his breath reeking of alcohol as he pressed the terrified boy against the bathroom wall. Marcus had moved without thinking. 20 years of SEAL training overriding 3 years of forced civilian restraint. The guard was unconscious before he hit the tile floor. Miguel had run without a word, leaving Marcus alone with his bleeding knuckles and the knowledge that he'd just compromised everything. Again. Now Victoria Castellanos stood 20 feet away, studying him with the intensity of a predator who'd caught an interesting scent. At 34, she commanded Meridian Financial with ruthless precision, having taken over when her father died 3 years ago. The business press called her brilliant and cold-blooded in equal measure. The staff called her the Ice Queen, beautiful, untouchable, and dangerous to cross. Marcus straightened slowly, wiping his hands on a clean rag before she could notice the blood. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "working late tonight?" Victoria's dark eyes swept over him, taking in details he hoped she wouldn't see. The way he stood, balanced, ready, occupying space like someone who'd been trained to control it. The scar that ran along his left temple, the careful way he'd positioned himself between her and the exit. Even though he probably wasn't aware he was doing it. "I could ask you the same question." "And," she replied, her voice carrying the crisp authority that had built an empire. "It's past midnight. Most of our cleaning crew finished hours ago." "Different schedule," Marcus said. "I handle the executive floors overnight. Less disruption when the offices are empty." The explanation was true, but incomplete. Marcus had specifically requested the overnight shift because it meant fewer people, fewer questions, and fewer chances for his carefully constructed cover to slip. The solitude suited him. The quiet helped keep the nightmares at bay. Victoria stepped closer, her heels echoing off the marble like a countdown. She'd changed from her usual business attire into dark jeans and a cashmere sweater, but somehow managed to look even more intimidating without the armor of a power suit. This was Victoria Castellanos off duty, which employees whispered was actually more dangerous than the CEO version. 8 months, she said, and Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Ma'am, you've been working here 8 months. I know because I personally review every security clearance for staff with access to the executive floors." Victoria's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Former military. Honorable discharge. Clean background check. But unusually light on details for someone your age. Marcus kept his expression neutral, but inside, alarms were screaming. He'd been careful about his background check, but complete erasure was impossible. Certain records were buried so deep that even government agencies had trouble finding them. But Victoria Castellanos had resources that went beyond normal corporate security. Some things aren't worth remembering. Well, himself, he said simply. Are they? Victoria moved closer still, and Marcus caught the scent of expensive perfume mixed with coffee. She'd been working late again, another thing the staff gossiped about. How the Ice Queen never seemed to sleep, never seemed to have a life outside the tower. Or are some things too important to forget? The question hung between them like a challenge. Marcus had the uncomfortable feeling that this conversation was heading somewhere he couldn't control. And loss of control was something that made his old training scream danger warnings. "I just clean floors, Miss Castellanos," he said, deliberately using her name to remind both of them of the distance between their worlds. Nothing more complicated than that. "No!" Victoria's voice carried absolute certainty. "You really don't." Before Marcus could respond, his phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Sophia. "Can't sleep. Bad dreams again. When are you coming home?" The message hit him like a physical blow. His daughter had been having nightmares for weeks, something about dark figures chasing her, about her father leaving and never coming back. The therapist said it was normal anxiety for a child who'd lost so much. But Marcus knew better. Sophia could sense the tension in him, the way his old life kept trying to claw its way back to the surface. He needed to get home. He needed to be the father she deserved, not the weapon he used to be. "I should finish my rounds," Marcus said, reaching for his mop. "Wait!" Victoria's command stopped him mid-motion. "That scar on your temple, how did you get it?" Marcus's hand moved unconsciously toward the mark. A nervous gesture he'd never quite managed to suppress. The scar was from Fallujah, 2019. Shrapnel from an IED that killed his spotter and left Marcus with a traumatic brain injury that took 6 months to fully heal. But telling Victoria Castellanos that would open doors he couldn't close again? "Accident," he said. "Long time ago." "What kind of accident?" The persistence in her voice triggered something in Marcus, not anger, but the cold alertness that had kept him alive through 3 combat tours. Victoria Castellanos was hunting something, and he was starting to understand that he might be the prey. "The kind that teaches you to be more careful," Marcus replied. Victoria studied his face for a long moment, and Marcus had the unsettling feeling that she was reading things he didn't want her to see. CEOs didn't get to the top by missing subtleties, and Victoria had a reputation for seeing through facades that fooled everyone else. "You know what I think?" she said finally. "I think you're wasted on cleaning floors. It's honest work. So is surgery. But we don't ask brain surgeons to mop the hospital." Victoria's smile turned predatory. "I'm always looking for talent. Marcus, real talent is rare in my world." The offer hung in the air like bait, and Marcus recognized it for what it was. Victoria Castellanos hadn't become one of the most powerful women in finance by accident. She collected useful people the way some people collected art, not for love, but for advantage. "I appreciate the thought," Marcus said carefully, "but I'm happy where I am. Are you?" The question was sharp, probing. Happy living paycheck to paycheck? Happy being invisible? Happy wasting whatever skills you obviously have on work that a machine could do better? Each word hit like a precisely aimed bullet, finding weak spots in armor Marcus thought he'd built to last. The truth was, he wasn't happy. He was surviving, which was different. Every morning he woke up and chose his daughter's safety over his own fulfillment, chose peace over purpose, chose the quiet life over the calling that still whispered in the dark hours when sleep wouldn't come. But happiness was a luxury that men like him couldn't afford. "Happiness isn't the point," Marcus said quietly. "Providing for my family is. Family." Victoria's expression shifted slightly, curiosity replacing calculation. "Wife?" "Ah, daughter. 12 years old." For the first time since she'd stepped off the elevator, Victoria's mask slipped. Something softer flickered across her features. Surprise. Maybe. Or recognition. "You're a single father." Marcus nodded. "Yes, ma'am." The admission changed something in the air between them. Victoria's posture relaxed fractionally, and when she spoke again, her voice carried less edge. "That's not easy." "No, it's not." Marcus felt the conversation shifting into territory that felt almost more dangerous than her earlier interrogation. Personal territory, where walls were thinner and secrets harder to keep. But she's worth it. What happened to her mother? The question was quiet, almost gentle, but it hit like a sledgehammer. Marcus felt his carefully constructed defenses crack, just slightly, just enough to let the pain leak through. "Cancer," he said simply. 3 years ago." Victoria's expression went completely still. Something passed across her face, understanding, maybe, or shared recognition of loss. For a moment, the Ice Queen facade disappeared entirely, replaced by something more human. "I'm sorry," she said, and the words carried genuine weight. "That must have been devastating." Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice. Even now, 3 years later, talking about Elena was like pressing on a bruise that never quite healed. She'd been the one good thing he'd found after leaving the Navy, the woman who'd seen past his damage and loved him anyway. Her death had nearly broken him, and only Sophia's need had kept him from following Elena into the dark. "She was a teacher," Marcus said quietly. "Elementary school. She used to say that every child deserved someone who believed they could do anything, be anything. And now you're making sure your daughter believes that." "I'm trying." Victoria was quiet for a long moment, bead fours studying his face with an expression Marcus couldn't read. When she spoke again, her voice carried a different quality, thoughtful rather than predatory. "Marcus Rivera," she said, as if testing the weight of his name. "Former military, widowed father, honorable man, trying to do right by his child." She paused. "But there's more to the story, isn't there?" "There's always more to the story." If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Marcus felt the walls closing in. Victoria Castellanos was smart, persistent, and had resources he couldn't match. Sooner or later, she was going to dig deep enough to find the parts of his past that were supposed to stay buried. And when she did, the quiet life he'd built for Sophia would disappear like smoke. "Everyone has more to their story," he said finally. "The question is whether it's worth telling. In my experience, the most interesting people are the ones who don't want to talk about themselves." Victoria's smile was different now, less predatory, more genuinely curious. "It makes me wonder what you're so afraid of revealing." Marcus was about to respond when they both heard it. Footsteps in the stairwell, moving fast, and trying to be quiet. His body tensed automatically, old instincts reading threat patterns in the sound. 2 men, maybe 3, wearing soft-soled shoes but moving with purpose. Not security, wrong rhythm, wrong approach. Victoria noticed his reaction. "What is it?" "Probably nothing," Marcus said, but he was already moving, positioning himself between Victoria and the stairwell access. "But you should probably get back to the elevator." "I don't need protection from now." The command came out in Marcus's battlefield voice, the tone that had made enemy combatants freeze, and his own men move without question. Victoria's eyes went wide, but she backed toward the elevator. The stairwell door opened, and 3 men stepped out. They wore dark clothing and moved with the controlled aggression of professionals. The kind of professionals who made midnight visits to corporate executives for very specific reasons. Marcus recognized the type immediately. Corporate espionage, industrial theft, or worse, in the financial world, information was worth killing for. And Meridian Financial handled enough high-stakes deals to attract the wrong kind of attention. The leader spotted Victoria and smiled, not friendly, but satisfied. Like a hunter who'd found exactly what he was looking for. "Miss Castellanos," the man said, his accent placing him somewhere in Eastern Europe. "We need to have a conversation." "I don't think so," Victoria replied, her voice steady despite the circumstances. The Ice Queen was back, armor in place. "Security is on the way." "No, they are not," the man said, calmly. "We made sure of that." Marcus stepped forward slightly, drawing their attention. "Building's closed, gentlemen. You'll need to leave." The 3 men looked at him and laughed, the kind of laughter that meant they saw an obstacle that could be easily removed. The leader's smile turned ugly. "The janitor wants to play hero?" he said to his companions. "How touching!" "Just go," Marcus said quietly. "Walk away, and nobody gets hurt." "Nobody gets hurt?" The leader pulled back his jacket, revealing a pistol in a shoulder holster. "I think you are confused about who is in control here, Janitor." That was their first mistake, and their last. Marcus moved like water, flowing around stones. 20 years of combat training compressed into 3 seconds of controlled violence. He closed the distance to the leader before the man could draw his weapon. His elbow connecting with the gunman's solar plexus with surgical precision. The leader folded, gasping, as Marcus relieved him of his pistol and turned toward the other 2. They were fast professionals with good training and better equipment. But Marcus Rivera had been forged in the fires of Fallujah and Kandahar, trained by the best killers in the world, and tempered by missions that existed only in classified files. They might be good, but he was something else entirely. The second man rushed him with a knife, a tactical blade that whispered through the air where Marcus's throat had been a fraction of a second earlier. Marcus pivoted, caught the man's wrist, and applied leverage that sent the knife skittering across the marble floor. A knee to the ribs doubled the attacker over, and a precise blow to the back of the neck dropped him to the ground. The third man was smarter. He grabbed Victoria, pulling her against his chest with a pistol pressed to her temple. "Enough," he shouted. "Back off, or she dies." Marcus froze, the familiar weight of an impossible choice settling on his shoulders. Save the principal, but risk civilian casualties. Make the hard call. Live with the consequences. It was Fallujah all over again. Except this time the civilian was Victoria Castellanos, and the choice would cost him everything he'd built. "Smart," the man said, reading Marcus's hesitation as surrender. "Now slide that gun across the floor. Nice and slow." Marcus looked into Victoria's eyes and saw something that surprised him. Not fear, but trust. This woman who'd built walls around herself, who trusted no one and counted on nothing but her own intelligence and will, was looking at him like she believed he could save her. Like she believed he was more than just a janitor. Marcus smiled, cold, predatory, and utterly without mercy. "You made a mistake," he said quietly. "What mistake?" Marcus's hand moved to his sleeve, pushing back the gray fabric to reveal something that made the gunman's eyes go wide with recognition and fear. Inked into his forearm in stark black lines was a symbol that every military professional in the world knew: the Navy SEAL Trident, the mark of the most elite warriors on Earth, earned through trials that broke ordinary men and forged legends. But this wasn't just any trident. This one was surrounded by additional markings that told a story to those who knew how to read it. A scroll with Team 6 in small letters, hash marks indicating successful missions, and at the bottom, barely visible unless you knew to look for it, a single word that made hardened special operators step back in recognition: Ghost. "You brought a knife to a gunfight," Marcus said, his voice carrying the cold certainty of a man who'd done this dance too many times to count. "But I brought 20 years of experience in killing people who threaten innocent civilians." The gunman's hand began to shake. Victoria felt the tremor and knew that something fundamental had just shifted in the room. The janitor who'd been cleaning her floors was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous. "Impossible," the gunman whispered. "Marcus Rivera is dead. Killed in action in Syria, 2021. Reports of my death," Marcus said, beginning to move with the fluid grace of a predator closing in for the kill, "have been greatly exaggerated." What happened next would change everything for Victoria, for Marcus, and for the carefully constructed lies that had kept them both safe in their separate worlds. But as Marcus Rivera prepared to become someone he'd sworn never to be again, only one thing mattered: the woman whose life depended on his willingness to let the ghost of his past rise from the dead. The ghost that Victoria Castellanos had just awakened with her relentless curiosity and sharp eyes. The ghost that was about to remind everyone in the room why certain men were legends and why legends never truly died. They just waited for the moment when they were needed most. And that moment had finally come. The three attackers were unconscious within 90 seconds. Marcus zip-tied their hands with restraints he'd pulled from a maintenance kit, the kind of improvised solution that spoke to years of field experience. Victoria watched in stunned silence as he efficiently disarmed them, secured the weapons, and checked each man's pulse with clinical precision. "Are they?" she started to ask. "Alive," Marcus said, without looking up from his work. "They'll wake up with headaches and bruised egos, nothing more." He straightened, and Victoria saw something in his posture that hadn't been there before: the confidence of a man who'd just stepped back into his element. "Security will be here in 5 minutes. We should probably have our stories straight." Victoria stared at him, trying to reconcile the mild-mannered janitor she'd thought she knew with the lethal precision she'd just witnessed. The sealed trident on his forearm seemed to pulse under the fluorescent lights, each detail sharp and unmistakable. "Team 6, she said quietly, reading the small script beneath the trident. "That's not just Navy SEALs. That's the best of the best." Marcus finished for her. "Or so they tell us." He was already rolling down his sleeve, hiding the tattoo that had just changed everything. "Look, Miss Castellanos, what you saw tonight cannot leave this room," Victoria interrupted. "I understand operational security, Mr. Rivera. The question is, do you understand that I just watched a dead man save my life?" Marcus went very still. "What do you mean, dead man?" Victoria pulled out her phone with hands that barely trembled. Even shaken, she moved with the efficiency that had built an empire. A few quick searches brought up what she was looking for: military obituaries, classified mission reports that had been partially declassified, fragments of a story that should have stayed buried forever. Marcus Rivera, Navy SEAL Team 6, Bravo Squadron. Killed in action during a classified operation in Syria, October 2021. Posthumously awarded the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism in combat. She looked up from her screen. Except you're standing right here, very much alive. Marcus felt the familiar weight settling on his chest, the crushing pressure of a cover story about to collapse, taking everything he'd built with it. That man is dead, he said quietly. Has been for 3 years. I'm just someone who cleans floors and tries to raise his daughter right. No! Victoria stepped closer, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to cutting through deception. That man saved my life tonight. That man moved like violence was his native language. That man has been hiding in plain sight for 8 months, and I want to know why. Before Marcus could answer, the elevator chimed. Security flooded onto the floor. Real security this time, armed and professional. Marcus raised his hands slowly, letting them see he wasn't a threat, and began the careful dance of explaining a situation that couldn't be fully explained. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of questions, statements, and carefully constructed half-truths. The attackers were taken into custody, identified as freelance operatives with ties to industrial espionage. Their target had clearly been Victoria, specifically information about Meridian Financial's upcoming merger with a European defense contractor. A deal worth $30 billion. Marcus told the story simply. He'd heard suspicious sounds, investigated, and defended Miss Castellanos when she was threatened. His military background explained his effectiveness, though he was careful to understate the extent of his training. Just enough truth to satisfy the immediate questions, not enough to trigger deeper investigation. Victoria corroborated his account without embellishment, and by dawn, the immediate crisis was contained. The attackers were in federal custody, the building was secure, and the official record showed that a former military janitor had bravely defended his employer from corporate espionage. But Victoria Castellanos wasn't satisfied with official records. As the last of the security team cleared the floor, she turned to Marcus with an expression he couldn't read. My office. Now. Marcus followed her to the executive elevator, acutely aware that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't control. The ride to the 45th floor passed in silence, both of them lost in their own thoughts. When the doors opened, Victoria led him into a corner office that spoke of power and loneliness in equal measure. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Seattle's skyline. The desk was massive, clearly custom-made, with not a single personal item visible. The walls held awards, degrees, and photographs of Victoria with world leaders and industry titans. But there were no family photos, no personal touches, nothing that revealed the woman behind the CEO facade. Victoria poured 2 glasses of whiskey from a crystal decanter, expensive single malt that probably cost more than Marcus made in a month. She handed him one and took a position behind her desk, every inch the corporate queen in her domain. 18 years old. When I started college, she said without preamble. Graduated summa cum laude from Wharton at 21. Harvard MBA at 23. Youngest VP. In company history at 28. CEO at 31. When my father died. She sipped her whiskey. I've built my entire life around being the smartest person in the room, Marcus. It's how I survived in a world that didn't want me here. Marcus remained standing, the whiskey untouched in his hand. I'm not sure what you want me to say, ma'am. I want you to tell me how a dead Navy SEAL ended up cleaning my floors. Victoria's voice carried steel, wrapped in silk. I want you to tell me why someone with your skills is living paycheck to paycheck, when half the private military contractors in the world would pay 7 figures for your expertise. And I want you to tell me why you're so determined to stay invisible that you'd rather scrub toilets than use your real name. My real name is Marcus Rivera, he said quietly. Everything else is just complicated. Victoria laughed. But there was no humor in it. Complicated. The man who just neutralized 3 armed professionals in under 2 minutes thinks his life is complicated. She set down her glass with a sharp click. Let me guess. Classified operations gone wrong. Government disavowal. The kind of mission that gets erased from official records, along with the men who carried it out. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. Victoria Castellanos was smart. Dangerously smart. And she had resources that could dig deeper into his past than he'd ever intended anyone to go. Some stories are classified for good reasons, he said. And some stories, Victoria replied, are classified to protect people who made hard choices in impossible situations. She moved around the desk, closing the distance between them. Syria. October 2021. Operation Ghost Protocol, a joint task force mission to extract high-value intelligence from a compound outside Damascus. Marcus went very still. You can't know about that. I know more than you think. Victoria's smile was sharp as a blade. I know that 12 operators went in, and only 3 came out. I know that the mission was officially a failure, and that all participants were listed as Kia to prevent foreign intelligence services from targeting their families. She paused. And I know that the intelligence you extracted saved approximately 50,000 civilian lives in 3 different countries. The whiskey glass slipped from Marcus's numb fingers, shattering on the marble floor. He stared at Victoria with something approaching horror. How? He whispered. My father didn't just run a financial services company, Marcus. Meridian Financial has been a front for intelligence operations since World War II. We launder money, we facilitate communications, and we provide cover identities for people who serve their country in ways that can never be acknowledged. Victoria's expression softened slightly. I know about Ghost Protocol because my company helped fund it, and I know about you because my father personally approved your new identity when you were burned. Everything he'd thought he knew about his situation, about his carefully constructed cover, about the random job that had given him a new life. It was all connected, all planned, all orchestrated by people he'd never seen coming. Your father, Marcus said slowly, Edward Castellanos. He was CIA liaison for financial operations 1995 to 2018, officially retired, unofficially still connected. Victoria moved to the window, her back to Marcus. He hand-picked you for this position, Marcus, not because we needed a janitor, but because we needed someone we could trust, someone who understood sacrifice. Marcus felt like he'd been hit by a truck. He's been dead for 3 years. You said, I said he died 3 years ago. I never said when he placed you here. Victoria turned back to face him. He set this up 6 months before he passed. Said someday we'd need someone like you. And when that day came, you'd be here. Someone like me. For what? Victoria was quiet for a long moment, studying his face. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight that made Marcus think of mission briefings and classified orders. Someone who could protect his daughter when the chickens came home to roost. Before Marcus could ask what she meant, Victoria's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, and her face went pale. What is it? Marcus asked. Text message. Unknown number. Victoria showed him the screen. The message was simple and terrifying. We know who he really is. We know about the girl. 24 hours. Marcus felt ice water flood his veins. Sophia. He was moving before conscious thought kicked in, heading for the door with the controlled urgency of a man whose world had just collapsed. Victoria caught his arm. Wait, she said. Running won't solve this. If they know about you, they know about her. You can't protect her by disappearing again. I can't protect her by staying either, Marcus replied, his voice rough with panic. These people, whoever they are, they're not going away. And I won't let my daughter pay for my past. Victoria held his gaze steadily. Then don't let her pay for it. End it. How? By trusting me, Victoria said simply. By letting me help you? By accepting that some fights can't be won by one person, no matter how good they are. Marcus stared at her, trying to read the woman behind the corporate armor. Why would you do that? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. No, Victoria agreed, but my father did, and more than that. She hesitated, and for a moment the Ice Queen facade cracked, revealing something vulnerable underneath. I know what it's like to lose everything that matters. I know what it's like to build walls so high that nobody can reach you. And I know what it's like to wake up one day and realize you're completely alone. Marcus saw something in her eyes that he recognized, the specific kind of pain that came from choosing duty over connection, mission over family, sacrifice over love. Victoria Castellanos might be one of the most powerful women in the world, but she was also one of the loneliest. Your father, Marcus said quietly. What happened to him? Victoria was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried years of carefully suppressed grief. Heart attack. Or, that's what the death certificate said. She moved back to the window, looking out at the city she'd conquered, but never learned to call home. The truth is more complicated. He'd been receiving threats for months. Not against him, but against me. People who wanted to use me to get to the intelligence networks he'd helped build. He was trying to protect me, and the stress. She trailed off. But Marcus understood. Edward Castellanos had died protecting his daughter. Just like Marcus would die protecting Sophia, if that's what it took. I'm sorry, Marcus said, and meant it. So am I. Victoria turned back to him. Sorry enough to make sure you don't have to make the same choice he did. Sorry enough to use every resource I have to keep your daughter safe. Marcus studied her face, looking for deception, and finding only determination. Victoria Castellanos was offering him something he'd never had in his previous life. Backup. Support. Someone with the power and resources to fight battles he couldn't win alone. But accepting her help meant trusting her completely. And trust was a luxury that men like Marcus couldn't afford. What do you want in return? He asked. Victoria smiled, and for the first time since he'd met her, it reached her eyes. I want you to teach me how to fight. What? Not physically, Victoria clarified. I have bodyguards for that. I want you to teach me how to think like a warrior, how to make the hard choices, how to live with the consequences. She paused. My whole life, I've fought battles with money and influence and corporate maneuvering. But the people threatening us now don't care about any of that. They understand violence, and I need to understand it too. Marcus realized that Victoria Castellanos wasn't just offering to help him. She was asking him to help her become someone stronger, someone capable of surviving in a world where power came from the barrel of a gun rather than the balance of a bank account. It's not a game, Marcus warned. The mindset you're talking about. It changes you. It makes you into someone who can do terrible things when necessary. Good, Victoria said firmly, because I'm tired of being someone who gets protected. I want to be someone who protects others. Marcus felt something shift in his chest, the same sensation he'd experienced when he'd first held Sophia, when he'd realized that some responsibilities were worth any sacrifice. Victoria Castellanos might be his boss, might be one of the most powerful people he'd ever met. But in that moment, she was just someone who needed what he had to offer. And maybe, just maybe, she had what he needed too. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. All right. Thanks for watching. Will see you in subscribe locations? Undock subscribe. You having 42 why? Marcus said quietly. But we do this my way. Complete honesty between us. No corporate games, no hidden agendas, and Sophia's safety comes first, always. Marcus shook it, feeling the calluses on her palm that spoke of someone who'd worked harder than most people realized. Partners. As their hands clasped, both of them knew they were crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Victoria Castellanos was no longer just the CEO of Meridian Financial, and Marcus Rivera was no longer just a janitor with a secret past. They were allies now, bound together by necessity and something deeper. The recognition that some battles could only be won by people who understood the true cost of victory. Outside the office windows, Seattle woke up to another ordinary day. But inside the 45th floor of Meridian Financial Tower, two extraordinary people were preparing for a war that would test everything they thought they knew about duty, sacrifice, and the price of keeping the people you love safe. The ghost of Marcus Rivera's past had finally caught up with him, but this time he wouldn't face it alone. So, Victoria said, settling into her chair with the focused intensity that had built an empire. Tell me about Sophia. Tell me everything I need to know to keep her safe. Marcus took a breath, and for the first time in 3 years, began to trust someone with the truth about the most important person in his world. As he spoke, Victoria listened with the complete attention of someone who understood that some information could mean the difference between life and death. They had 24 hours to prepare for whatever was coming. 24 hours to become something neither of them had ever been. A team. And as the morning sun climbed higher over Seattle, Marcus Rivera began to hope that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. This time, he might not have to choose between his past and his future. This time, he might be able to save everyone who mattered. The safe house was a modest 2-bedroom apartment in West Seattle, the kind of place that blended into the urban landscape without attracting attention. Marcus had insisted on moving Sophia there within hours of the threat, using protocols he'd hoped never to need again. Now he sat at the kitchen table at 3 a.m, watching his daughter sleep on the couch while Victoria worked her laptop across from him. 17 shell companies, all traced back to a single source, Victoria said quietly, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Kozlov Industries. Russian oligarch with ties to organized crime and state intelligence. She looked up from the screen. Oligarch Tain. They want the Meridian Financial client list, specifically the classified government accounts my father managed. Marcus didn't look away from Sophia. Even asleep, his daughter's face showed the strain of the last 24 hours. She'd asked only one question when he'd explained they had to leave their apartment. Are we going to be okay, Dad? He'd promised her they would be. But promises were easier to make than keep. Kozlov's reach, Marcus said. How extensive? Global. Military contractors, intelligence brokers, assassination teams. Victoria's voice carried the weight of someone who'd spent the night learning exactly how dangerous their enemies were. But he has a weakness. His operation depends on staying invisible, working through proxies. Direct confrontation isn't his style. Then, we make it direct. Marcus finally turned to face her. Force him out of the shadows. Victoria studied his expression. Over the past 18 hours, she'd watched Marcus Rivera transform from the careful, controlled janitor into something far more dangerous. The change was subtle, but unmistakable the way he moved, the way he analyzed threats, the cold calculation behind his eyes when he spoke about their enemies. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "I'm thinking that Kozlov wants something from you, and he's using me to get it." Marcus stood, moving to the window with the fluid grace of someone checking sight lines and escape routes. He could have killed me cleanly months ago, if that's what he wanted. Instead, he exposed my identity, threatened Sophia, forced us together. Why? Victoria felt pieces clicking into place. Because he needs both of us. He needs my access to the financial networks, and he needs your expertise to execute whatever he's planning. Which means, Marcus continued, we have something he wants more than our deaths. That gives us leverage. A soft knock at the door made them both freeze. Marcus moved instantly, positioning himself between the door and Sophia, while drawing a pistol from the holster Victoria hadn't even realized he was carrying. "Marcus," a voice called, quietly through the door. "It's Liam. I have information." Marcus relaxed slightly, but didn't lower the weapon. Liam Chen was a former CIA analyst who'd helped with Marcus's identity transition 3 years ago. If he was here, the situation was either getting better or much worse. Marcus opened the door to reveal a thin man in his 40s, with sharp eyes and the nervous energy of someone who dealt in dangerous secrets. Liam glanced past Marcus to Victoria and Sophia, calculating risks. "We need to talk," Liam said. "All of us." They gathered around the kitchen table while Sophia continued to sleep. Liam pulled out a tablet and began scrolling through files that made Victoria's security clearance look elementary. "Kozlov's endgame," Liam said without preamble. "He's not after your client list, Victoria. He's after the emergency protocols your father established in case of catastrophic intelligence compromise." Victoria felt her blood turn to ice. "Project Lazarus." Marcus looked between them. "What's Project Lazarus?" "Complete identity reconstruction for high-value assets," Victoria explained. "New backgrounds, new lives, new families, if necessary. My father created it during the Cold War to protect defectors and deep-cover agents. But it's also how foreign intelligence services could disappear their own people into American society. Sleeper agents, assassination teams, saboteurs. Kozlov wants to buy his way into American infrastructure," Liam added. "Not just money laundering, complete integration. His people become American citizens with perfect backgrounds, undetectable by any normal screening process." Marcus understood immediately. "How many people?" "Initial deployment would be 50 operatives," Liam said. "But once the system is proven, potentially thousands. They could place assets in government, military, corporate leadership, a shadow network that could manipulate American policy for decades." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't just about Marcus's past or Victoria's company. This was about national security on a scale that dwarfed most terrorist threats. "The activation codes," Victoria said quietly. "He needs both of us to access them. My biometric authorization and—" She looked at Marcus with dawning understanding. "Your operational clearance. You're not just a former SEAL. You're one of the Lazarus administrators." Marcus nodded grimly. "Your father recruited me specifically for that role. Ghost Protocol wasn't just a mission, it was a test. He needed to know I could be trusted with something this sensitive." "So, we're at an impasse," Liam said. "Kozlov can't get what he wants without both of you cooperating, but he also can't let you live once he has it." "Unless," Marcus said slowly, "we change the game entirely." Victoria leaned forward. "What do you mean?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his eyes moving between Sophia's sleeping form and the two people who represented his only allies in a war he'd never wanted to fight. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone making a decision that would cost him everything. "We give him what he wants," Marcus said, "but we give him a version that destroys him instead of empowering him." Over the next hour, they planned what Marcus privately called a Trojan horse operation. They would appear to surrender, provide Kozlov with access to Project Lazarus. But the system they'd unlock would be a modified version, one that would identify and track his operatives rather than hiding them. "It's a good plan," Liam admitted. "But there's one problem. To sell the deception, you'd both need to appear completely broken. Kozlov is too smart to believe you'd cooperate unless you had no other choice." "What kind of no other choice?" Victoria asked. Marcus and Liam exchanged a look that made Victoria's stomach clench. He'd need to believe that Sophia's life was in immediate, unavoidable danger. Marcus said quietly, "And that cooperating was the only way to save her." "No." Victoria's voice was sharp with rejection. "We are not using a 12-year-old girl as bait." "We wouldn't be," Marcus said, "but he would need to think we were that desperate." Victoria stared at him, beginning to understand the true cost of the kind of life Marcus had led. "You're talking about making your own daughter believe her life is in danger to sell a deception to the enemy." "I'm talking about keeping her alive," Marcus replied, his voice carrying a pain that made Victoria's chest tight. "And making sure Kozlov's operation dies with him." Before Victoria could respond, Sophia stirred on the couch. She sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes with the confused disorientation of someone waking in an unfamiliar place. "Dad?" she called softly. Marcus was beside her instantly, his whole demeanor shifting from tactical planner to protective father. "I'm here, sweetheart. Just talking with some friends." Sophia looked around the room, taking in the three adults hunched over laptops and files, the tension that seemed to fill the air like smoke. At 12, she was old enough to recognize when the grown-ups were afraid, even when they tried to hide it. "Are we in trouble?" she asked. Marcus knelt beside the couch, meeting her eyes with the steady gaze that had anchored her world for 3 years. "We're going to be fine. I promise." Sophia studied his face with the intense focus of a child who'd learned that sometimes promises were all that stood between her and chaos. "You look different, Dad. Like when you have the bad dreams." Marcus felt something crack inside his chest. Sophia had inherited her mother's ability to see through his defenses, to read the parts of himself he thought he'd hidden. She knew about the nightmares, about the nights when he'd wake up calling for teammates who'd died years ago. "Just old memories, acting up," he said softly. "Nothing for you to worry about." But Sophia wasn't satisfied. She looked past Marcus to Victoria, studying the woman who'd somehow become part of their crisis. "Your dad's boss, right? From the cleaning job?" Victoria felt an unexpected warmth at the question. Sophia's tone wasn't suspicious or hostile. Just curious, the way children were when trying to understand their expanding world. "I am," Victoria said, "and your father is a very good man, Sophia. He's helping me with something important." "What kind of something?" Victoria glanced at Marcus, seeing him struggle with how much truth to share. She made the decision for him. "The kind where good people have to be very brave," Victoria said simply. "Like your dad has always been." Sophia considered this with the seriousness of someone older than her years. "He was a soldier, wasn't he?" "Before." The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus had never directly told Sophia about his military service, but children were more observant than adults gave them credit for. She'd seen the scars, noticed the way he moved, recognized that her father was someone special, even if she didn't understand exactly how. "Yes," Marcus said quietly. "I was. A good soldier." Marcus felt tears threatening for the first time in months. I tried to be. Sophia nodded as if this confirmed something she'd always known. Mom used to say that good soldiers protect people who can't protect themselves. Your mom was very smart, Victoria said softly. She was. Sophia looked between the three adults. So, if you're all trying to protect people, that makes you the good guys, right? The simplicity of the question hit Marcus like a physical blow. In Sophia's world, there were good guys and bad guys, and good guys won because they were brave and did the right thing. She had no concept of the moral ambiguity that defined most of Marcus's professional life. The gray areas where right and wrong blurred into survival and necessity. But maybe that was exactly what they needed, the clarity that came from a child's perspective. Yes, Marcus said, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. We're the good guys. Then you'll win. Sophia said, with the absolute confidence of someone who still believed in heroes. Good guys always win. Marcus hugged his daughter, holding her close, while his mind raced through the implications of their plan. Sophia was right. Good guys did win, but only when they were willing to pay the price. Victory demanded. And the price of stopping Kozlov was going to be everything Marcus had built since leaving his old life behind. I need to make a phone call, Marcus said, standing. He looked at Victoria with an expression that carried years of hard decisions. To Kozlov. To set up the exchange. Marcus, Victoria started, but he cut her off gently. This is the only way. You know it, and I know it. Marcus moved toward the door. Trust me to do what needs to be done. As Marcus stepped outside to make the call that would determine all their fates, Victoria found herself alone with Sophia and Liam. The girl had curled back up on the couch, but her eyes remained alert, watching the adults with the wariness of someone who'd learned that safety was temporary. He's going to sacrifice himself, isn't he? Sophia asked quietly. Victoria felt her heart break a little. What makes you say that? Oh, because that's what good soldiers do, Sophia replied, when protecting people is more important than anything else. Victoria knelt beside the couch, meeting Sophia's eyes with the same respect she'd show an adult. Your father is very good at his job, Sophia, and his job is keeping you safe. He's not going to let anything happen to you, even if that means taking risks. I know, Sophia said simply. I just wish he didn't have to. Outside, Marcus was speaking in the clipped, professional tones that Victoria had learned to recognize as his operational voice. When he returned, his expression was grim, but determined. It's done, he said. Exchange happens in 6 hours. Victoria and I provide the Lazarus codes. Kozlov releases his leverage. What leverage? Victoria asked, though she was beginning to suspect she already knew. He's got enough evidence to destroy my cover identity, put Sophia in danger, and expose the entire network my father helped build. But if we cooperate, he'll disappear and leave us alone. You don't believe that? Liam said. No, Marcus admitted. But it doesn't matter what I believe. It matters what we can make him believe. The next 6 hours passed in careful preparation. They refined their deception, established backup protocols, and prepared for every contingency they could imagine. As dawn broke over Seattle, Marcus found himself sitting with Sophia, watching the sunrise through the safe house windows. I want you to stay with Aunt Liam today, Marcus said, using the cover name they'd established. He's going to take you somewhere safe while Victoria and I finish our work. Sophia nodded, but her eyes remained fixed on her father's face. You're scared, she observed. A little, Marcus admitted. But being scared doesn't mean you don't do what's right. It just means you're human. Will I see you tonight? The question was asked with studied casualness, the way children probed for reassurance about things that terrified them. Marcus felt the weight of every promise he'd ever made, every oath he'd sworn, every choice that had led him to this moment. "Yes," he said simply. "You'll see me tonight." It wasn't technically a lie. Sophia would see him, one way or another. Whether he'd be alive to see her was a different question entirely. 2 hours later, Marcus and Victoria stood in the abandoned warehouse where the exchange would take place. Victoria had never been in a situation like this, but she drew strength from Marcus's calm professionalism. He'd taught her, over the past day, that fear was useful data about risk, not a weakness to be overcome. "Remember," Marcus said quietly, as they heard vehicles approaching, "whatever happens, the mission is stopping Kozlov. Everything else is secondary." Victoria nodded, understanding that Marcus was giving her permission to survive even if he didn't. It was both the most generous and most terrifying gift anyone had ever given her. Kozlov arrived with 6 men, all of them moving with the controlled aggression of professional killers. He was smaller than Victoria had expected. A thin man in his 50s, with intelligent eyes, and the quiet confidence of someone who'd never had to raise his voice to be obeyed. "Miss Castellanos," Kozlov said, his English accented but precise. "Mr. Rivera. Or should I say, the ghost? You have been most difficult to locate." "We're here," Marcus said simply. "Let's finish this." The exchange proceeded with the formality of a business transaction. Victoria provided her biometric authorization, Marcus input his, operational codes, and Kozlov's technical team verified access to the Lazarus protocols. But underneath the surface civility, Victoria could feel the tension building like a storm about to break. "Excellent," Kozlov said as his team confirmed successful penetration of the system. "Most satisfactory. And now, Mr. Rivera, we come to the second part of our arrangement. Which is?" Kozlov smiled, and Victoria felt ice water flood her veins. "Your death, of course. Did you really think I would allow the ghost to continue existing? Even in retirement, you represent too great a risk to my operations." Marcus didn't seem surprised. "I figured as much. But here's the thing. Kozlov, I didn't give you access to the real Lazarus system. Impossible. We verified. You verified access to a mirror system," Marcus continued, his voice carrying the cold certainty of someone who'd outmaneuvered a superior enemy. "Every identity you try to create will be flagged, tracked, and rolled up by federal authorities within hours. Congratulations, you just handed the FBI a complete list of your American operations." Kozlov's face went white with rage and understanding. "You played you," Marcus finished. "From the beginning. The moment you threatened Sophia, this stopped being about survival and started being about justice. What happened next was violence compressed into seconds. Kozlov's men drawing weapons, Marcus moving with lethal efficiency, Victoria diving for cover as the warehouse erupted in gunfire. But Marcus had planned for this too, and federal agents poured through doors that had supposedly been sealed. When the smoke cleared, Kozlov was dead. His network was in ruins, and Marcus Rivera was kneeling on concrete, bleeding from wounds that looked worse than they were. Victoria reached him first, her hands shaking as she checked for serious injuries. "Are you all right?" "I'm alive," Marcus said, managing a weak smile, "and Sophia's safe. That's all that matters." 6 months later, Marcus stood in the executive elevator of Meridian Financial Tower, no longer wearing a janitor's uniform. His new title was Director of Corporate Security, a position that came with a salary, an office, and the kind of respect he'd never expected to find in the civilian world. But more importantly, it came with something he'd never had before: Partnership. Victoria met him at the elevator doors, her expression softer than it had been in their early encounters. The Ice Queen was still there when needed, but she'd learned to trust someone enough to let her guard down. "How was Sophia's recital?" she asked as they walked toward her office. "Perfect," Marcus replied. "She played Pachelbel's canon in D. Elena would have been proud." "I'm sure she would have been proud of you too," Victoria said quietly, "for everything you've become." They entered Victoria's office, which now contained a few personal touches. A photograph of her with Marcus and Sophia at a Seahawks game, a drawing Sophia had made, showing the three of them as superheroes, a small plant that somehow survived despite Victoria's complete inability to care for living things. "The Kozlov cleanup is complete," Victoria said, settling into her chair with the satisfaction of someone who'd just closed a challenging deal. "His entire American network has been rolled up, and the intelligence agencies are very grateful for our cooperation." "And Project Lazarus?" "Officially decommissioned, but the infrastructure remains available for legitimate operations." Victoria smiled. "Turns out, there's a market for helping people disappear when they need to start over. We're calling it Phoenix Consulting, helping people rise from the ashes of their old lives." Marcus laughed, appreciating both the symbolism and the business opportunity. "Your father would be proud too." "I think he would be," Victoria agreed. "He always believed that some kinds of wealth couldn't be measured in dollars." As if summoned by their conversation, the office door opened, and Sophia bounded in, still wearing her school backpack and carrying a report card that bore straight A's. She hugged both of them with the enthusiasm of someone whose world had expanded to include chosen family alongside biological bonds. "Guess what? I got accepted into the advanced music program." Victoria and Marcus exchanged proud glances over Sophia's head. The girl had not only survived the crisis 6 months ago, but had thrived in its aftermath, growing stronger and more confident as she watched the adults in her life become the kind of people worthy of her trust. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Marcus said, ruffling her hair. "We'll have to celebrate." "Can Victoria come to dinner tonight?" Sophia asked. "She promised to teach me how to make her grandmother's empanadas." "If she wants to," Marcus said, looking at Victoria with an expression that carried warmth and invitation in equal measure. "I'd love to," Victoria replied, and realized she meant it completely. As the three of them prepared to leave the office together, Marcus reflected on the strange turns his life had taken. He'd started as a janitor hiding from his past, and had become a man who could face his future without fear. Victoria had started as the Ice Queen, and had become someone who understood that true strength came from connection, not isolation. And Sophia had gained something she'd never dared hope for: a family that chose to stay, no matter what challenges arose. "Dad," Sophia said, as they waited for the elevator, "do you think good guys really always win?" Marcus considered the question seriously, thinking about Kozlov's defeat, about the network they'd built together, about the quiet life he'd thought he wanted, and the meaningful life he'd discovered instead. "I think good guys win when they're willing to work together," he said finally, "when they're brave enough to trust each other and smart enough to know they can't do everything alone." Sophia nodded with satisfaction. "So, we're still the good guys?" Marcus looked at Victoria, who smiled back with the warmth of someone who'd learned to let people inside her defenses. He thought about Elena, about the teammates he'd lost, about all the battles that had led him to this moment in this place, with these people he'd learned to love. "Yeah," he said, softly, "we're still the good guys." The elevator doors opened, and the three of them stepped inside. Together, former janitor, former Ice Queen, and the girl who'd reminded them both what it meant to fight for something worth saving. As they descended toward the ground floor and the life they'd built together, Marcus realized that some ghosts never truly died. They just learned to live again, surrounded by people brave enough to love them despite the shadows they carried. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, those shadows learned to dance in the light. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.